And then I come back and do the intro afterwards after I've gotten the conversation. And so what I can pull on, but we'll get going. Dr. Christian Conte, thank you so much for coming on the show. Really grateful that we've been able to connect and super excited for where this conversation goes. So thank you.
Definitely glad to be here.
Yeah. So we'll start off every episode. We start off with gratitude. So we're both East Coast guys, 11 a.m. now. What are a few things that you can express gratitude for that you've experienced today?
Well, I'm a really good person to ask about gratitude because I literally wake up as the moment I open my eyes,
Mm,
first thought I have is thank you so much for letting me be alive.
mm,
I really believe in this and have done this for many, many years, where the very first thought is gratitude. And I fill my mind with gratitude throughout the entire day. So
mm-hmm,
I start with gratitude for being alive. I then move to just the physical gratitude. So I'm grateful for my eyesight, for my arms and legs. Um, I had a really freak accident about a week and a half ago where I I got up in the middle of the night and I tried to avoid stepping on my Saint Bernard. I
mm-hmm.
slipped on her tail and I fell and smashed my head off the
Whoa.
back of the bed. Oh my goodness, it was painful. But my neck cracked and I was sitting on the floor for a moment where I was really kind of stunned. I mean, it was a really weird accident.
Wow.
But so I was sitting there and I thought, my goodness, like, geez, whiz, like, what if I'm really severely hurt from this? And then it ended up that my neck was not broken. I went and got CT scan, all that stuff. And I just constantly think, as soon as the moment I wake up, like, thank you for letting me have all those basic things that I think a lot of people have a tendency to take for granted. And then I go out in concentric circles and I'm grateful for my wife and daughter. I'm grateful for my family, for my ancestors. I'm grateful for every opportunity that I get to impact the world and give the world my best every day. So that's how I start my day every day. So that's cool that you start off a podcast talking about gratitude, because I really believe that shapes us. Those
Mm.
first thoughts that we have in the day absolutely set a precedent for the rest of our day. So I believe starting off with gratitude is probably one of the most profound things any of us can do.
One, that is the best answer. I mean, I think I've only done like 15, 16 episodes, but with hands down, that's the best answer I've gotten. And I really like the intentionality behind gratitude for being alive, moving into the physical body, and then moving out into those circles of your family and community. I think that's a great approach, and definitely something that I will specifically clip and share. That's super impactful. Thank you for that. Can you talk a little bit? I've done a fair amount of research, but can you talk a little bit about your background, some experiences that have shaped you and led you into the work that you do now, and your expertise?
Yeah, and I'm happy to talk about it. But I always tell people, anybody who's listening to this, it really doesn't matter anything that I've ever done in my life. It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
matter accolades, awards, and degrees. Only thing that matters is whether or not the words that we speak are helpful for someone. That's really all that matters.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing has led to the next in the story of all of our lives, and that's true with me. I guess I would say that I started off because when I remember being a teenager and asking my dad, I said, well, he studied earth science, and I was a hot-headed idiot teenager, and I said, well, what do you like about studying rocks? To my dad, right? And my dad looked at me and he said, listen, you're only ever going to live on one planet your whole life. Don't you think you ought to get to know that planet? And I said, my goodness, that's a great answer. So when I went to study in school, like, and I looked at different things to study, I thought of his advice and I realized that I'm only ever going to live with me my entire life. So don't I think I ought to get to know myself? So I started to study psychology.
Mm.
And yeah, so that's what took me into the field of psychology. And I have spent a lifetime, I've been 22 years, I've been doing this work. And I specialize in working with people convicted of violent crimes. So, I'm in maximum security prisons. Actually, the state of Pennsylvania I created a theory,
Mm-hmm.
basically a counseling theory called yield theory. And it's an evidence-based approach right now. And Pennsylvania Department of Corrections officially adopted it in 2020. So every officer, 18,000 employees are trained in yield theory. And then every incarcerated individual goes through at least one of my programs, and then everybody who comes back to prison goes through one of it. So really, here's the essence. The essence is this: all this experience I've had. I work with professional athletes, elite athletes. I work with people who are top business people in the world, and I work with everyday people who are struggling, celebrities on TV, all that kind of stuff. But I realize that the world boils down to two kinds of people, really
Mm.
two kinds of people. There are people who have issues and dead people. So
Mhm.
if you're alive, you have issues. So do I. So does everyone. And it's humorous, but it's true because it's kind of set how I work with people. I don't look at people as top down. I look at it, we're all in this life together. Um, I really like that saying there, but for the grace of God, go I. So I've
Mm.
always kind of believed that who am I to say that I would have done things differently had I been someone else? And created this theory that is about meeting people where they are, genuinely meeting them where they are, and then helping them make real decisions from that moment forward. Because I think that's all we
Mhm.
can really do.
Mm.
And so, yeah, I'm passionate about all this work, whether it's prison, work in prisons, or work with athletes, or work with everyday people who are struggling. Like I'm just passionate about the work I do.
Great. I think how important and powerful it is to just be able to shift our perspective, and the two types of people, as I've, done research on you, watched videos and stuff, I've heard you mention that, and I've heard you open with that in different presentations. And, you usually get a good chuckle out of the room and everybody laughs, and it's kind of a good icebreaker in a way. But I think it is a powerful perspective shift. Can you talk about why you lead with that, and what do you think that does to kind of set the tone for people when they listen into what you're about to share with them?
Yeah, I mean, I was speaking at this, I think it was a New Jersey Department of Corrections event. So they brought me in to speak, and I'm looking at these people who are in all their military gear and high ranking people in their system. And I respect that. I think that's phenomenal. They've worked really hard to get to the positions that they're in. But as I said to the audience that day, I said, listen, I look at your uniforms, I look at your, those of you who are dressed up, like I see it, and I admire you. I admire the hard work that you've done to get to where you are. But there's something that I know that makes me feel really comfortable in this moment, and that is that each and every one of you had to get dressed this morning. While you were getting dressed, you might have been impatient with a loved one. You might have been frustrated with things you saw in the world and wanted to be different. And so every single one of you has moments where you struggle, and
Mm.
we all do. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But what that does is that helps us see that we're all in this together. We need
Mhm.
each other. So I open with that to try to level not just the playing field, but to level the ego, because ego gets us caught up in thinking I'm this or I'm that. That's
Mhm.
another reason why I led even today was saying it doesn't matter what kind of accolades or degrees or any of that stuff, because that's all ego. At the end of
Mhm.
the day, it's whether or not these words actually resonate with people
Sure.
and can be helpful for them. I've never 20,000 plus hours. I quit counting after 20,000 hours of clinical experience. So think about this 20,000 times plus. I'm sitting down one on one in sessions with people,
Mm.
and I'm focused entirely on helping them assess where they are in their lives, what they can do about what they have in the current moment. And I've done this for so many years for so many diverse people all over the world.
Mhm.
And what I've seen is this: there's always something that we can work on. Always. Doesn't matter how far we've
Mm.
come, there's always something we can work on. As much as we're going to be, listen, you can have the best meal of your life last night. It could be the greatest meal you ever had. You're still going to be hungry today.
Mhm.
And in the same way, there's always a place for us to grow psychologically. So I think by opening with that, to tie it back in, I think it helps us level that playing field of it's all ego will get in the way and tell us we already have the answers to life. We already know our position's right. We're right. Whatever we believe is right. Whatever anybody else believes that's different is wrong. But then it
Mhm.
helps us see, no, listen, we all have issues. We all have places to work on, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah,
But let's be humble and work on that together.
totally. Can you, I think you're a fantastic storyteller. Can you quickly go into the labyrinth that you talk about in Walking Through Anger? I've also saw one of the TED Talks, but I think that's, again, another powerful perspective shift for people to kind of realize how we're just, sometimes not seeing as clearly as we could.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for saying that I'm a good storyteller. I love telling stories. My mom told me stories when I was a kid. Like she told me stories every night, right? And she got me interested in Aesop's fables. And
Mm.
I remember when I was little, we would listen to Paul Harvey, and she loved Paul Harvey on the radio. You might be too young to remember Paul Harvey, but he was awesome. He'd be like, and now page two, and now the rest of the story. And And I love that. And I want to kind of give a shout out to my mom for introducing me to storytelling, because I spent my life devoted toward to being able to tell stories. I write stories all the time. So the concept of the labyrinth was this: when our daughter was in second grade, she came home from school, and a little girl has said something pretty mean to her, and she just didn't even understand it. Like, our daughter's living peace. Like, she's 16, so she's a phenomenal human being. She's never missed a day of meditation since she was 6.5 years old. She's a genuinely kind human being.
Mm.
And so she really didn't understand, why would someone say something mean? Like, it didn't resonate with her. So I took her into our meditation room, and we have a glass coffee table. And, for me, I like to give physical analogies or
Mhm.
metaphors for people, because that helps us learn. It's tangible.
Yep.
And I don't know if this is a video or just audio, your podcast.
Oh, we'll do video. Yeah, this on YouTube as well.
Okay, so if you
Podcast and
think about
Instagram.
this, so here's this glass coffee table, and I had her look. I knelt down next to her, which I tell all the time to parents: make sure you get on the knee and talk to young children,
Mhm.
because standing over top of them can elicit a fight or flight response, whether you mean to or not.
Yeah.
So I get down on a knee and I look at her and I say, let's look at this coffee table. So we look into the coffee table, and I said, imagine if there was a labyrinth in here, like a big maze, right? And it's in complete darkness. But just the way we're looking through this coffee table, you and I, we can see into this labyrinth, and we see that it's dark, and we see that there are people in there and they're bumping into each other. Would we be mad at people for bumping into each other? And she was like, no. And I was like, why not? And she's like, because they just can't see each other. And I said, I think that's what happened with that little girl. When she said that to you today, I just don't think she could see that she was being hurtful.
Mm.
And that story of the labyrinth is something that we used for many years in our family system to understand when people hurt others. I really don't believe that they're doing it maliciously. I think people do the best they can with what they have in any given moment. For
Mhm.
example, people are really attached to whatever they believe.
Mhm.
Have this tendency to believe. The fancy psychological term is called asymmetric insight, which means we believe we're really deep and mysterious, but we believe everybody else is shallow and predictable, especially if those people believe something different than we believe.
Mhm.
So I have this concept called the cartoon world. And the cartoon world is this: it's the world the way we think it should be. So the way I describe it is, there's this cartoon world. People should think, feel, believe, and behave the way I say. And then there's the real world, where people think differently. They feel
Mm.
differently, believe, behave differently. And as long as you align your expectations with your cartoon world, this is how the world should be, you're going to be let down. But when you learn to align your expectations with reality, then you'll be more prepared to
Mm.
actually encounter reality. So that story of the labyrinth is helpful. And many of the listeners right now might think about how that resonates with them. Think about how someone said or did something that was hurtful toward you, and you don't understand, like, why would they say something like that? Why would they do something like that? But if you look at it from the perspective of the labyrinth, it doesn't mean that the pain just goes away magically. It doesn't mean the
Mhm.
hurt just magically drifts off into the sunset. What it means is you're able to understand it. And even if we get rid of all the psychological jibber jabber and just go to straight neuroscience, what happens is, when you are struggling in emotional pain and you're in your what's called the limbic system, the center of your emotional system, you are processing that event. They hurt me. They did this. Da, 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 da. But the moment you begin to attempt to understand, you shift where your neurons are firing from your emotional system, your limbic system, to your frontal cortex, your higher level thinking center. And this is measurable stuff. We can put you in
Mhm.
a brain scan and watch this happen. And so what happens is, then now when you're thinking about something, analyzing it with higher level cognitive functioning, fancy way of saying you're thinking about it rather than
Mhm.
feeling about it, then what happens is it changes the perception, changes your perspective, which changes how you feel about the event. So it doesn't magically take away the pain, but it most
Mhm.
definitely lessens it.
Mm. The other quote that I've written down that I think is correlated to this. Now, when I heard you say it, I think you were specifically talking about recidivism and how we look at some people in our society look at prisoners as completely separate than, my culture, my society. They're thrown away, they're cast to the side. But you said there is no them, there is only us. There are no others, there's only us. And I think it's an extremely powerful, again, it's a simple quote, but when I heard you speak about it, it hit me pretty heavily. Can you kind of go into that and maybe how you use that phrase and understand it so we can continue just to kind of push this narrative of, oneness and looking at each other as brothers and sisters, and shifting our perspective a little bit more.
Yeah, so I'm a practicing Zen Buddhist, and maybe that's all a bunch of hogwash, right? If you're listening, you say, "Oh, it's a bunch of crap." That's fine. But what happens, what it does for me is this. Let's imagine that this finger, and for those who are only listening on audio, I'm picking up my pointer finger. But imagine this finger is having an issue with this pinky finger. So it's like, "Oh man, I can't believe this." I'll do it on the video. Hopefully you can just see this. "Oh, we're so different. I can't believe you. You're so different." And then one day it finds out, "Oh, we're all in the same hand. We're all connected." And I think that's really kind of my metaphor for what human beings are. Like, we think we're so different. And look, if you had, let's say your ankle was bothering you, you got a cut on your ankle. You don't chop off your foot because you have a cut on your ankle. You start taking care of it.
Yeah.
And I think that's when we embrace that type of philosophy with others, when people are doing something harmful. Now, people have a tendency to think in extremes, right? The fancy word is called enantiodromia. We go from one extreme to another. That was coined by Carl Jung, Jung. But this enantiodromia, going from one extreme to another, boils down to this. People have this tendency to believe, well, if you don't believe exactly what I believe, then you believe the opposite. And that's silly, because I'm not saying that when people hurt people, we should say, it's no big deal, that's fine. To the contrary, I believe that consequences are absolutely essential. There are people who, for example, the conversation comes up about prisons, and people talk about solitary confinement, and it's not psychologically helpful for people. And when people who have never been in prisons have this discussion, it's almost elementary to watch people who've never been involved with it, because I work with people who have done horrific things to every cellmate they ever had. And if you put them in a cell with someone else, you are sentencing that other person to be tortured, to be victimized in horrific ways. And so, yes, solitary confinement is absolutely necessary at times. Look, consequences for our actions are inescapable. So I'm all about consequences. But here's the pitch that I have for the world, and why I do the work I do in prisons. For the people who are incarcerated who will return to society, if they did X, Y, and Z to get to where they are, then if we don't teach them a new path, then what chance do they have to learn a new path? And then people will jump in with their all or nothing. Well, then you're saying everybody's going to change. No, I'm not saying everybody's going to change. What I'm saying is that at the end of the day, just the way we talked about gratitude when you wake up in the morning, at the end of the day, you have to look yourself in the mirror and say, what did I do to contribute to the world today? And if I interact with somebody, I want to know that I've given them my absolute best. Doesn't mean I'm perfect. I might mess up left and right. Learn from it. But I want to make sure I gave people my absolute best.
Sure.
So I work with people who are incarcerated in the area of saying, look, what you did was awful, horrific. But if you're come back out to the world, we need to make sure that you are at your best version of yourself. And so the programs I create, everything that I do, the work around it, is to meet people where they are mentally, physically, spiritually, and say, what can you learn from this moment forward to be less of a threat to others or yourself? And so, yeah, so I think when we get away from the all or nothing thinking, you're either for inmates or for officers or whatever. No, listen, I'm really trying for humanity to say, how can we all improve it to the best of our ability every single day? And that means starting with myself, challenging my own ego, challenging my own perspective, and saying, I don't have all the answers. That's why I said it when I opened. I said, I'm practicing Zen Buddhist. I believe in it devoutly. My wife and daughter and I practice it quite literally every day. But I'm really open to someone saying, that's the wrong path. That's cool. Like, and maybe it is. I'm giving my best to the world. And I think that's all we can really do.
Yeah, for the listeners that don't know, and I haven't really spoken about it before, but the name One Big Team for me, and I spoke this before we started recording, it really came from the essence of oneness and a lot of things that you're describing. And those are the practices that I've tried to cultivate And even just the reminder of every time I say One Big Team Podcast, or I talk about it, or I think about it, it's another, in my mind, it's a repetition to remind myself to look at everybody as we're all in the same hand. We're all in this together. And it's been a really good practice. I think the stories that you just shared would be a great transition into yield theory. But before we dive into that, just to tell you how I got introduced to your work, one of my favorite things to do is, haven't done it as much recently. I've been in a lot of audiobooks recently, but just going to a bookstore, just walk around, see what books called me. And I was at a Barnes and Noble, and I came across your book, Walking Through Anger, picked it up, and I was like, yeah, this is the one today. And one of my other practices, and I had a podcast on this about intentional kindness. And I love walking around, just trying to make eye contact and talk to as many people as I can. So I'm at the Barnes and Noble line. I'm talking to the 3 people behind the register. I'm super smiley. I'm like, how you doing? Everything's great, great. So I hand him the book, and the guy looks at it and he reads the cover, Walking Through Anger, new design for anger management. And he's like, looks at it, and I go, hurry up, just to mess with him. And we just had a great laugh about it. And that still makes me laugh, thinking about that story now.
That's a great story. Thank you for telling me that.
It was good because he got it too. So we had a good one. But then I remember going through it, and it was right. Gosh, it must have been, I remember reading through it during the pandemic, going through it. So great book there. And that's where I first was introduced to, not just you, but yield theory. Can you talk about yield theory? Maybe just define it, how you came up with it, the work you've done, anything about yield theory.
Yeah, back in 1998, I remember coming out of a meditation and having this visual of just if somebody was going down the wrong path and you wanted them to change the highway that they're on, you could come at them head on, crash into them, stop them from the direction they're going, and it would stop them. It might hurt one or both of you. But there's another hypothetical. Again, this is a thought experiment, but imagine that you drove alongside that car, you merged with them, you yielded with them, and you're driving alongside next to them. So your car comes up, you're driving next to them. And then over time, they realize, hey, we're going the same direction. Let me jump in your car and save gas, or I'll jump in their car and save gas money. And so you're in their passenger seat. Mm-hmm. And so you're seeing through the same windshield they're seeing. And then maybe even over time, they trust you and allow you to drive. So now you're really in their driver's seat and you're truly seeing what they see. Mm. Now you can have an opportunity to steer them down a different path. Mm. So this mentality, this concept, it also comes from the philosophy and the martial art Aikido. So I studied martial arts my whole life. And one of the martial arts that my brother and I practiced was Aikido. And Aikido is based on a push-pull philosophy. So if you push me, instead of me pushing back, I pull. So you're basically throwing yourself. Mm-hmm. That's why some of the smallest people in the world could throw the biggest people in the world, because essentially they're just stepping out of the way. So the bigger person's actually pushing him or herself. Mm. And then if you pull, I pull rather than the opposite. Now, same thing with verbally, mentally. If you push, I'm going to pull. I'm not going to push back. So if you come up, hey, screw you, you're stupid, whatever, I go, well, maybe I am. Yeah, I'm not resisting it. And that's part of non-attachment in Buddhism as well. Like, I'm not attached to my ego, my position. And so yield theory is about meeting people where they are. And a lot of people love to say that. That's an easy statement. That's like saying, oh, I still have more to learn. Which, by the way, I love when people say that. And then 2 minutes later, you talk about something that they disagree with, and they are absolutely certain that their perspective is right. 2 minutes ago, you just said you had more to learn. So if you really have more to learn, then isn't there more to learn? Or you're sure you have all the answers on that one? So yield theory is about meeting people where they are. And it's about saying, okay, where do we go from this moment forward? And ultimately, it boils down to doing 3 things. Remember, I said I'm constantly questioning my own ego. So I said to myself, what do I really do? Like, what do I really do? I stand at a cell door and talk to somebody. I sit in an office, comfortable Zen setting, and talk to people in a chair. Like, what do I do? And there are 3 actions that I do. I listen to people, I validate them, and then I help them explore options. And that's really the 3. That's it. That's the essence of it. And for young people that want to study psychology, they say, well, what is it like? They come sit in a session. Maybe they come watch a session. And a lot of times, I remember I had this experience, and most people who came and ever sat in on my sessions said the same thing. You sit and watch a psychology session, and you say, well, that's easy. I can do that, until you actually sit down with someone and you realize, wait a minute, there's intentionality in all this. So
Hmm.
the intentionality in yield theory is to listen, validate, and explore options. And
Hmm.
those are the three things that really you do. Now, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I was speaking at this mental health convention, about 500 people there, right? And this woman comes up to me at the break, and she's dressed to the nines, and she's super condescending. And she looks at me and she said, that's it. That's your big theory, three things. I said, yeah, but if you think about it, all Bruce Lee ever did was move, block, and hit. And he did pretty well for himself. So, like, sure, we can say move, block, and hit, but that doesn't make us as proficient as Bruce Lee. So you can say the words listen, validate, and explore options. And look, we all do that. To some extent, we all do that. The question is, how well do we do those three things?
Sure.
And can we constantly improve? So just like you're working with a martial artist, there's no fighter. I work with some of the best UFC fighters in the world. There's no fighter that's going to be like, I already know how to fight, so I don't need to train for my upcoming fight. No, they're going to train. Yeah, they know how to move, block, and hit, but they're going to keep practicing it. And in that same way, communication's ongoing. So I'm going to constantly work on assessing, what did I do effectively? What did I do ineffectively? What can I do more effectively next time?
Mm.
So that's what yield theory is. It's about meeting people where they're, it's a listening. And again, it's how you listen.
Yep.
It's about validating, which doesn't mean condoning or agreeing. It just means acknowledging where people are.
Hmm.
And then it means exploring options. In other words, where do we go from this moment forward? Now, listen, for those who get involved in psychology, who are interested in learning more about it, there are definitely 7 fundamental components that can take it as deep as analytical psychology and depth psychology.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, we can get really deep really quickly. But I also have spent a lifetime where I was blessed to be told that when I was real young about a real high IQ. And so, in that way, I was always pushed to read and to learn, which I loved, except there were moments, I'll be honest, when you're a young kid and you're told you're a genius and they throw these esoteric books at you,
Hmm.
that I would read this stuff that was real complicated. And I remember reading the German philosopher Hegel one time. And this guy is like, I mean, you read the first paragraph of something he wrote and you feel like you're dizzy. And so I thought to myself, man, when I get older, I will never make things this complicated for people. And what I've learned throughout my entire career is this. I'm 48 years old. What I've learned is if you can't explain something to a child, you just don't know it.
Hmm.
Like what happens is people get real frustrated. Well, you're not getting it. You don't understand it. Well, what they're saying is they don't understand it, because if you truly understand it, you can explain it to a child.
Hmm.
And so that's what I've done. I've dedicated my career to helping make things super simple for people. And it's always interesting. So I do a YouTube channel. You mentioned this video will be on YouTube. I do a YouTube channel. It's a free resource for people all over the world. And I hear from people all over. And 99.9% of the comments I hear are all kind and appreciative and grateful, all that stuff. But every once in a while, you hear the things, no matter what you do, you're going to hear negative things. So sometimes people will say, oh, it's just this, or it's just basic, it's just this. Well, look, psychology isn't complicated. It's whether or not you actually practice it. It's one thing to say you understand that listening is an ongoing process. It's another thing to constantly assess in every given interaction you have
Hmm.
how effectively you listened. It's one thing to say, I know what validation is. It's another thing to say, do you validate not till you check the box and say, I validated them, but until the person actually feels validated? And do you explore options in a way that might include options you're not considering? Because until you do those types of things, I would say we all have a lot more to work on. And then even once you do know how to do those things, well, now you have more to work on.
Totally, totally. You said a couple times for those interested in psychology, but to me, it goes back to the story about your dad studying rocks. It's the earth that we have. And I think I'm hopeful. And from what I've seen, that this younger generation specifically is taking a more keen interest in understanding the mind,
Yeah.
which is really exciting. And I think everyone should have a baseline understanding of the human psychology and how that all works. With yield theory, can you share one or a couple maybe transformational experiences that you've seen from going through that practice with others?
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things that at my age and where I've done in my career, I'm I'm beyond humbled to hear from people all over the world,
Mm.
quite literally every day. And it's powerful. It's powerful. I mean, I had a vision about this many years ago, and it's not a matter of just having a vision. It's a matter of working hard every single day, 7 days a week. But yeah, I hear stories from people every day of how it's happened. But I'll give you some fun stories. I mean, I think one of my fun stories that I think is it's good for people to hear and it's exciting or whatever. But so I was on death row. It's interesting because most people don't even ever step on death row or never be allowed to even go in there and know what it looks like. So I walked into this prison where they had death row, and on the first unit I walked in, I said to the officer, "Hey, open the doors. I want to talk to the guys." And the officer laughed. And I said, "No, open the doors. I want to talk to the guys." So he radios up to the bubble, the control room that opens the doors. And he says, this doctor is saying he wants to open the doors. And the guy in the bubble, you could hear him laugh over the radio. And then they go off and they find out who I actually am and that I have the authority to do that. And so he said, okay, he really wants it open. And I said, open them. So they open the doors. Now in prison, if the doors open, people talk really tough behind the doors. Like as soon as the doors close, it's called gang warring in prison. You gang war on the door. So you're talking stuff on people all day long. But the moment those doors open and you realize you might have to follow it through with all the threats you've given, people don't even come out. So the first unit I went on death row, and I said this to, only 4 guys came out. And so these 4 guys came out and I talked to them. And then word travels really quickly in prison, actually probably faster than cell phones because they can talk through the pipes and things. So by the time I got to the next unit, and I said, open the doors, everybody came out. And so I delivered this talk to these men on death row. So I said to them this, I said, listen, if I gave each and every one of you a bucket, what would you put in this bucket? And the first guy said, food. I said, okay, cool. You'd have food in your bucket. And looked at the next guy. Next guy said, water. I said, cool. You'd have water in your bucket. I look at the next guy on death row. He's a big guy, big guy. And he said to me, he said, I put my cellie's head in the bucket. Now, listen, you're speaking in prison. You can't blink with this stuff. So I said, okay, cool. You'd have your cellie's head in the bucket. So I said, here's my point. You'd have food in your bucket. You'd have water in your bucket. You'd have your cellie's head in the bucket. My point is this: whatever you put in your bucket will be in your bucket. And that's a pretty obvious point, right? That's like, are you kidding me? You brought us out to tell us this? And I said, but the same is true with your mind. Whatever you put in your mind will be in your mind. If you fill your mind with violent music, violent movies, violent lyrics, violent things, then you'll have violence in your mind. But if you want peace in your mind, you got to fill your mind with peace. So everybody, even that big guy who said he wanted his cellie's head in the bucket, he agreed. He said, you're right. He actually sat back. He was like, man, you're right, doc. So when I walked away that day, I was talking to the major of the prison, and he walked out, and we looked at each other and we said, well, I don't know what's more concerning. A, that we understand why that man was on death row because he wanted to sell his head in a bucket, or B, the fact that on death row they're single celled, so that man didn't even have a cellmate. So I don't know whose head he wanted in that bucket. But listen to this. This applies to you and me. Think about this. What do you put in your bucket? Like, I listen to people who tell me they get angry about politics and then watch the news all day.
Yeah.
It's like I had this story once. Imagine if you're at a restaurant. It's a really expensive restaurant. So you go to the restaurant and you're like, hey man, this food is terrible. It's cold. It's awful. There's stuff in my food. I hate it. So give me a second helping. Like, why would you pay for a second helping? You don't even like the first one.
Mm.
And as silly as it is, the same is true with all of us. All of us. When you think of Henry Wadsworth Longfellow wrote a poem called A Psalm of Life. And in it, he said, our hearts, though stout and brave, still like muffled drums, are beating funeral marches to the grave, which means that all of us have an end date, right? We all have, life has a beginning, middle, and end. Now, if you've ever sat with someone in hospice, you know that in people's final moments, they're not thinking, "Ooh, I wish I got away with this. Or I wish I got away with that." In people's final moments, they're thinking, "I want peace." And like Wadsworth Longfellow said, we're all going to want peace. We're all going to have that final moment. And so what I say is, if we know we want peace, and we know we master what we practice, then we got to start practicing peace now. So fill your mind with what you want to
Mm,
be in your mind. Practice the peace that you want, because our end date is coming, and
mm,
we can't just magically have it. Like if you want to play guitar, you can't just magically wake up one day and say, "Okay, I'll play guitar." Like you got to practice it for a long time. And so I think the same thing with peace. That doesn't mean life's going to be easy. And listen, there are people out there who are listening who might be struggling in their own lives right now. So they say, "Oh, so I guess you're just saying." Nothing I'm saying is a just.
mm,
I don't think that life's super complicated, but I do think it takes tremendous effort. And to actually live your message and practice what you teach, practice what you believe in, that's the goal. For many people, they already have the answers. It's just a matter, do they actually live it?
mm.
And so I challenge people all the time, instead of just saying that you have the answers, go ahead and live the ones you have, because we all learned in kindergarten, be kind to others.
Mhm.
That's an easy lesson to understand here, but you got to actually do it. And that means realizing that some people are in the labyrinth. Some people have filled their mind with the kind of things that they didn't want in their mind. Just be mindful that you operate first and foremost for yourself. Put in your mind what you want in your mind.
Mm.
Practice what you actually want to master. Because whatever you're practicing, I promise you will eventually master it, whether it's complaining
Yep.
or whether it's peace. But you'll master what you're practicing.
The question I was going to ask is, can you give a strategy to guide some people on how they can cultivate more peace in their life? But I really think the last sentence was that practice what you want to master, because we're all practicing right now, either intentionally or unintentionally. But I mean, I think that's the answer. I mean, if there's something better than that, if I said, hey, in one sentence, one phrase, what's the best strategy to cultivate peace?
That's it. That's
Yeah.
it. Practice it. Practice
Mm,
doesn't mean it's gonna be comfortable, doesn't mean it's gonna be easy. And ego will want to jump in and be like, "Oh, so you're saying it's just easy? Well, what about when people don't believe you? What about blah blah blah?" Listen, ego is going to want to tell you everything to
mhm,
convince you you're right, everybody else is wrong, and you're not. You don't need to change. But if anybody out there really truly believes that they have more to learn in this life, and that
mm,
means approaching life with humility, genuine curiosity. Those are the two primary aspects of yield theory. We approach people with humility, as though
mhm,
we don't know what is going on in your mind, and with genuine curiosity, like we want to learn. Teach me about you, teach me about your perspective.
mm,
Um, I use the concept of a box, and that's really kind of my
mm,
most central teaching.
mm.
Um, in the prison system, they call it the Conte box, but it's really just a box. It's a box. The concept is this: if, as human beings, we only ever see one or two sides of a box at most, it's just physical perspective. And so to believe that we know what's going on the other side of the box is arrogance. If we really want to know what's going on the other side of the box, we have to humble ourselves to say, "Teach me, tell me what you're seeing on your side of the box." But ego wants to kick in and say things. I've had people come up to me multiple times in different talks throughout the years and be like, "Well, I've been all around the box. I know every side." Well, you can't see all sides simultaneously. Only
Mhm.
ego tells you that you do. Unless you're truly omniscient, you're not seeing all sides at once. And so that means, can you humble yourself and realize there's more to the story? People get so angry over politics as if they see all sides.
Mm,
And it's just so silly. You don't see all sides at once.
mhm.
Um, so I think it's important for us to lead with humility. There's
Yeah.
no one side has the answer to everything, and we can all learn from everyone.
Yeah, the Conti box, I love that. And it makes me think also, one of the articles that I read on your site, which I really, really loved, was men can meet, but mountains never. And
Mm.
it's, to me, I feel like those two are tied together, because a mountain's not going to move to the other side of the box or explore it, right? Can you talk about that article and that practice?
Well, that concept is comes from the Jewish tradition.
Hmm.
It's a proverb, and think about that: men can beat, mountains never. So, in other words, if you're stuck in your position and you really do believe the way you think, feel, believe, and behave is the ultimate truth, then you're not going to meet with someone else. When people ask questions, they don't usually ask questions. They usually just want to confirm what they already know.
Mm,
It's called confirmation bias.
mm,
And the problem with confirmation bias is this: it really does convince you that you're already right. So it's funny. I just put something up on my Patreon page. So I have this YouTube channel, and I put extra content on this Patreon page. I'm just learning about.
Mhm.
Um, but it's interesting. But anyway, so on this, I wrote this article the other day for it, where I said, um, when you believe that you have basically, when you ask questions to people and you're just asking to confirm what you already know, you usually do that in what's called closed-ended questions. So you might say,
Mm.
isn't it true that, well, you're not really asking that question
Mhm.
because you're not even leaving any room for potential more than, it's not just yes or no. Like that's literally a technique lawyers would do to questions to corner somebody.
Yeah.
Um, and so if you're pinning people down on yes or no, either or questions, that is not a reflection of your subject. It is not a reflection of your knowledge. It's actually a reflection of your fear that
Mm.
someone could give you an open-ended answer that could counter something that you already know. And so the concept of men can meet but mountains never is that if you're stuck in believing that you really truly are right about whatever you think, feel, believe, and do, then you're not going to meet with someone else. But if you can humble yourself and again lead with genuine curiosity and genuine humility, then you will be able to connect with others. And look, it's scary. It's not easy. It's
Yeah.
not easy for people to let go of what they believe. Every
Mhm.
listener out there, as a human being, really does believe. I mean, that's why you believe it. That's why, as human beings, we believe what we believe. It's really, no,
Mhm.
this must be the truth. But we live in a solar system with, if I asked you how many planets are in the solar system, what would you tell me?
Well, I guess they took Pluto out supposedly, so like 9 or 8, but I'm sure there's a lot more going on that I'm unaware of.
So here you are as an educated individual, and you wouldn't even know how many planets are in our own solar system, right?
Mhm.
Let alone in our galaxy. And so, right now, the International Astronomical Union recognizes 8 regular-sized planets, 6 dwarf planets, one of which is bigger than Pluto. Ceres is bigger than Pluto. Most people
Mhm.
don't know that. They might have found another ninth planet that was actually a regular-sized planet. And that's just in our solar system. Our
Mhm.
galaxy has an estimated 175 billion with B suns. And Hubble taught us several years ago now, maybe 5, 6 years ago now, that there are at least 2 trillion with a T galaxies, each with hundreds of billions of suns. The life, the universe, there's so much out there. So what do? We shrink the universe down to size and we say, whatever I think, feel, believe, and behave is truth. And anybody who believes differently is wrong. That's what ego does. But listen, ego has a reason to do that. It helps us feel safe.
Mhm.
It's scary to think. Maybe you know something about the world that I don't know. That's scary.
Sure.
Um, what I have found is this, and I think it's a good way to wind this down. But what I have found is
Mhm.
when you are vulnerable, that actually takes strength. And when you're vulnerable enough to say, let me be humble, I don't have the answers. So teach me what you see. I'll tell you what I see from my side of the box, but I would really love to learn what you're seeing on your side of the box. I
Mm.
think what that does is it helps us live the message of peace
Yeah.
that we hope to see in the world. And that's really what my career and life is devoted to, trying to bring people actual peace. So I'm kind of hopeful people heard what we talked about today, and there was some aspect of it that they can take and move through. Like I said, that YouTube channel is a great thing for people, a free resource. I got books.
Yeah, man.
That Walking Through Anger, I feel proud of. That's a legacy book for me because I talk a lot about yield theory, tell
Yep.
a bunch of stories in that. Um, but I got some other books and things too. But yeah, appreciate you. I'm grateful to have met you and taken some
Mhm.
time to be able to sit down with you.
I really, really appreciate it. Could I ask you one more quick one?
Give it to me.
I think a lot of what you're talking about, there's an element of curiosity in the things that you're discussing about. And I've always gone back to there's one elite skill above all things, right? And you talk about it in a story of strength. I think you posted on your YouTube about a son and a father. Can you share that story and then we'll wrap it up?
Yeah, so a little boy is trying to lift this really heavy sack, and his father comes up to him and he says, "Use all your strength, son." And little boy says, "I am." And the father says, "No, you're not." And little boy says, "Yes, I am." And father makes him put the sack down, look him in the eyes. He says, "Look at me, son. You are not using all your strength because you haven't asked me for help yet." So what I said, that little story, I said to people like, listen, if you need help, ask, because the strength is with us, with all of us. And if you see somebody who needs help, help them, because we need each other. That's for sure. One big team, I guess.
That's it, brother. Hey, listen, that is the most elite skill, the ability to ask for help. And I really appreciate you helping me become a better version of myself today on the show. I believe that this podcast, this episode specifically, will help others. Dr. Christian Conte, thank you so much. Really, really grateful for it.
Definitely, brother. Great to meet you.
Take care, man.